morning, everyone, and welcome to researchED Home. It's going to be a fabulous week. We have a fantastic program, and today we are so lucky to welcome Philippa Cordingley. Now, Philippa is Chief Executive of Cure, someone who is involved at policy level and has been so for years and years. You know, the quickest chat with Philippa will teach you something and you will feel a bit more clever by the end of it. So I am very, very excited to welcome her this morning. And Philippa, if you're ready, we'll go straight to you.
Okay, so I'm just going to share a screen. Good morning, everyone. So that is everyone. Can you see that screen?
Not yet. That's it.
Okay. So there we go. Get this thing back up. Right.
Yeah, we can see it fine, Philippa. Thank you.
Okay, I've lost the image. Hang on. Spent the whole week doing this, and now I'm doing it digitally with lots of people, and suddenly in a new context, it's not working. Can you hear me and see me?
I can hear you and I can see you absolutely
okay,
fine.
I can't see anything at this end. Well, morning, colleagues. So what I want to share with you, and we're going to have a go at making it interactive, is the results of a systematic map of the evidence about great leadership of continuing professional development and learning, and how that links with curriculum development. Together with Steve Higgins and Rob Coe, who are the architects of the Sutton Trust Toolkit, and Toby Greeny, the team who developing great teaching, we thought it was important to update what we've got, and way of an overview of the evidence about CPD, because we were aware that the system was beginning to change, and in particular that in America, people were beginning to do much more textured work about what was happening in school as a result of CPDL being offered outside school, so that we've got new kinds of studies coming forward. And because this is a time when there's a lot of change happening in terms of continuing professional development and learning, we wanted to see how the landscape was changing. So we created this map. And the first thing to say, well, there we are, is the kinds of evidence we came up with had some important things. First of all, there are no systematic reviews of research at all about curriculum development that include evidence about impacts on pupils. It's really important to know that. We had a very good look. It takes a long time to look for something that isn't there. So, you know, it may be that some people can come up with the odd one. But on the whole, there are just too few studies of curriculum development and its impact for anyone to have done systematic reviews of that. But what was encouraging was that a surprisingly large number of the systematic reviews about continuing professional development and learning do show evidence about the interconnections between continuing professional development, learning, and curriculum development. So we have been able to unearth some evidence about the curriculum development process and its links with CPDL, and in particular the leadership of curriculum development and the leadership of CPDL, and how those things relate to each other. The evidence talks first of all about the particular things that leaders contribute both to CPDL and curriculum development, both their direct contributions, but also that at a distance things they insist on as part of the design. They show us some important things about how we think about continuing professional development and learning and curriculum development, both how we position both. And they emphasize always the importance of taking an holistic approach to both curriculum design and development and CPDL design and development. And in particular in three areas, the role of specialist contributions and of external and internal contributions, the way in which ambitions and goals are set and the importance of doing those holistically for pupils, for teachers and the school as a whole, and the importance in all of those things about responding to the needs and the strengths and the starting points of the local community, the local professional community and the local school. So that's the kind of areas of evidence that I'm going to share with you. So here are some headlines. First of all, what is it great effective leaders of Great CPDL do? The first thing they do is that they position CPDL in all of its activities as a process through which everyone in the school community is taking shared responsibility for pupil achievement, but also for pupil well-being. This is quite new. The importance of linking support for teachers in taking pupil progress forward, being so strongly linked with taking pupil well-being forward is a really encouraging but quite strongly new finding from across these systematic reviews. And this business of understanding CPDL as not as fixing things that are wrong, but a way of building shared responsibility. That's something else that we found was new. We found equally strongly an emphasis on developing not just teachers' knowledge and skills and understanding, but at the same time doing that in ways that helped them take responsibility for ongoing professional growth, individually and collectively. So if you like, there's a mirror image for teachers and for pupils about attending to, yes, of course, the core skills and knowledge and understanding, but at the same time, remember, we're doing this for people. This is about people. So for professionals, that's about taking forward their professional identity and growth. And for pupils, that's about understanding their knowledge and skill progress in the context of their well-being. Key in all of that, we find in this map a lot of evidence about the way in which leaders model openness to leadership learning and to professional learning is incredibly important. We know perfectly well that young people pay as much attention to what we do as to what we say, and the same is true of school leaders, that people focus equally much on what we do as what we say, and so showing how we are learning all the time, not developing our policies behind our elbows, but doing that in public and debriefing that in public is really important. Most of the evidence in this map about systems for CPDL and broad approaches to CPDL are geared to helping teachers manage complexity. That effective and powerful curriculum development design and effective and powerful CPDL are not just about a body of knowledge, they're about helping teachers work through the complexity of putting that knowledge, new knowledge and skills and understanding to work in complex school systems, managing complexity. And that one of the most important ways leaders can do that is to take time to acknowledge and take into account that curriculum development and CPDL usually involve significant cognitive demands for teachers. We're asking them to think differently, to make complex between different bodies of knowledge. We're asking them to understand new things in the round and in depth. This is a big cognitive journey. We're asking them to do practical things differently, to unlearn, to try new things, to take risks, to experiment. This is practically hard work as well. And in taking their professional identities forward, we're usually asking them to do emotional work too. So when we're designing CPDL, we have to think about and allow time and space for work in all those dimensions. And then the last key point in this part of the findings was that effective leaders take quite a lot of time, and I'll come back to what this means practically a little bit later on, to recognise and mobilise specialist contributions to CPDL. That includes, very importantly, not just specialist knowledge and understanding of the curriculum content or pedagogy, but specialist knowledge about continuing professional development and learning itself. And you'll find the web link there to the report, and these slides are up now on the Cure website. We did find things in the map that reinforce previous findings, but that also offer some new ones. And the ones in red are really, I think, new nuances or new findings. So first of all, there's lots more in these new systematic reviews about the importance of elapsed time, about pacing, that goes along with that business of managing the emotional, cognitive and practical demands that CPDL makes. So it takes time. Yes, there's a quantum of time for professional learning, but it takes elapsed time for any depth to happen. People need to keep coming back to things iteratively over time. And there's much more texture here about what it is we need to understand about the colleagues we're supporting through CPDL. That we need to take account of their professional identities and their professional practices and what motivates them. And that's different for different groups of colleagues. It's different for colleagues who are also scientists. It's different for colleagues who are working with early years teachers. You know, there are important edges to and strengths in different kinds of flavors of professional identity, if you like, that need to be taken into account. That we need to take account too of the kind of particular approaches to learning that work in different contexts. Approaches to professional learning in small rural schools, you know, and in complex special schools where you're working with multi-professional teams. No, these need to matter and take account of context and account of teachers' own strengths and what they bring to that professional learning process. And we, above all, need to take account of and build on what teachers know and can do already and what their beliefs are about their subject, their phase, and their pupils. And we need to take account not just of specialist expertise in the content of the CPDL process, but also of deep knowledge about our pupils and the community they come from. This is part of this holistic point of view that aligns with evidence we've had previously about excellence for everybody and about aligning continuing professional development with teachers' aspirations for what pupil achievement could look like if their own learning is successful. And we've got this new lens to that and really ambitious goals for what people's well-being could look like if our curriculum and our CPDL does its job. And then these previous points that we've always had to emphasize, the importance of thinking about why things are working and not working in different contexts alongside exploring new approaches. And above all, giving teachers lots of opportunity through collaboration and peer support to experiment and to support each other in risk-taking as they refine their new approaches and understandings in the context of how pupils respond. So just to give you a quick graphical overview, and then we're going to try a little bit of interactivity. If you split those findings down, there's a sense here of what it is we want head teachers to be doing in terms of creating an environment where everybody understands CPDL as taking shared responsibility for pupil achievement and well-being. And that seeing the school as a vehicle for promoting professional growth for individual teachers and for the profession and the community of professionals as a whole. That important work of modelling your own professional learning and unlearning as it works through your own day-to-day tasks. Designing structures and systems, not just to do whatever job you want them to do, but to do that in a way that helps teachers to manage complexity. Just remembering to test all of them. Is this helping teachers manage complexity? And doing that through managing the cognitive and practical and emotional demands and mobilizing specialist contributions. There are parallel tracks of that for middle leaders that become slightly more contextualized. And then another set of parallel tracks of those for teachers. And I'm just going to pull out one small sub box in this graphic, the one on the far right for teachers, because we start to get much more detail and granularity when we think. So here it says, for teachers, there's something very important about linking self-awareness and broader professional goals and collaboration, holding those three elements of their professional identity in relationship to each other as part of sharing responsibility for pupil well-being and achievement through their own professional learning. So there's something really quite subtle and complex there. Now, I'm going to try a little mini survey monkey so that you've got an overview of everybody who's participating thinking. So Helene is just going to put a link into chat to a 2-question online quiz, which invites you from the findings so far. Just there's a drop-down list of the headlines from the findings so far to highlight 3 that you think might be new or fresh, and 3 that you think might be most relevant to this weird working remotely, starting to reconnect as communities where we sit in. And we're going to use an overview of that because I'm going to share the results, if this all works, in 2 or 3 minutes. So just take a minute to have a look. It shouldn't take you more than 2-3 minutes. This is an answer more, as D.H. Lawrence puts it, from the solar plexus in the mind. So hoping now, Helene, we've got the web link shared in the chat.
It's been shared.
Okay. So I'll take a couple of minutes. Do I just collect response?
It should just automatically appear when there are any results.
At the moment, no responses are entering.
Just to clarify for everyone, you can find a link in the chat box at the bottom.
New share. So here we are. So the answer to that first question, things that seem new or fresh, we've got 4 effective leaders make, oh, we can't see the answer. What was question 4, Paul? Can you?
If you hover over the question with your mouse,
okay,
you'll get the full.
Right, make reciprocal. Right, effective leaders make reciprocal links between CPDL and curriculum development. That seems to be the thing that seems to have most responses. And then, hang on, now I'll go back. How do I go back? Ooh. Paul, can you help? And so then the next one is designing CPDL effectively means creating time. And then effective leaders position CPDL as shared responsibility. And then we've got a lot of responses, or perhaps even more, helping teachers manage complexity by taking account of the cognitive, practical and emotional demands, and linking with the professional community. So there seem to be some quite new points there spread over those. And then if we go to question 2, we've got perhaps high aspirations for pupil and well-being. I think at this time we're just also conscious of well-being. That's really important. And the elapsed time, again, in a time when we're all rushing and government's rushing us, perhaps it's not surprising that we've got there. And then again, back to the practical and emotional and cognitive demands. Well, I hope that was helpful for you and interesting to see people's responses and to feel a bit connected with everyone who's involved. We'll go back to the slides now. So the next slide dives us deeper into the evidence about curriculum development. So there's a mirror image set of findings about curriculum development and its leadership that are very strongly linked to CPDL, and that these two things are very closely linked, and that when you look at the evidence about effective leadership of curriculum development in the CPDL studies, one of the things that shines out most strongly, which again will feel really important at the moment, is that it's not just about national, remembering these are international studies, it's not just about a national community that should be shaping curriculum development, but how that aligns with and builds on the strengths and contributions of local communities and with school values. And again, that same point that curriculum development, just like continuing professional development and learning, isn't about something done to teachers by teams of specialists. It's about taking shared responsibility for meeting ambitious goals for excellence for everybody. And it's about integrating curriculum development and realization with CPDL. And fundamentally, we saw in so many instances that really well designed curriculum development, where teachers had a chance to collaborate and where school leaders were helping teachers take time to debrief not just the curriculum they'd achieved from collaborative curriculum development, but also what teachers had learned and how that had shaped their professional growth, was a really powerful driver of CPDL. But that it's very clear from these reviews that without powerful CPDL being designed into curriculum development from the beginning, not as an afterthought, it was rarely effectively implemented. So going away and designing a curriculum and then going, hey, here's my lovely curriculum, you go off and do it, that was coming up as not being very effective in these studies. There's some interesting texture about the contribution of specialist expertise. We saw some really moving examples in these reviews of the importance of helping school leaders remember and reconnect with the way that their own specialist knowledge of their subject or their phase or child development have made a profound impact on their professional work as new teachers, and debriefing that and using that to help them recognize what really powerful specialist contributions could contribute to curriculum development and CPD, because that's a really powerful tool. And when we're really aware of what specialist contributions can do, one of the things specialists in CPDL, in child development, in pedagogy, in curriculum content, they help us understand why what we're doing matters. They help us with the big, why is this important questions. They help us know as leaders how to recognize and locate quality in schemes of learning we might be thinking about, in making sure there's depth in the CPDL activities and resources we're making available. And when we've got that at our fingertips, we know that then helps us as school leaders recognize the specialist knowledge and skills of CPDL facilitators and curriculum designers. We don't, as school leaders or leaders of CPDL, have to be expert in all the subjects or all the phases or pedagogy, but we have to know where we can access that expertise and what its role is and how important that is in securing depth in both curriculum development and CPDL. And one of the things in particular is that helps us commission leadership of CPDL and curriculum development really well. And that's just as true if we're commissioning it from teams inside the school as if we're commissioning and buying in external support. In particular, the map highlights some tests that leaders can use to weigh up the support they might buy in or the processes and protocols they might put in place as part of curriculum development and CPDL development. Here's this first thing, and it isn't often research tells you to avoid things, and it's very helpful when it does. But it's very specific. It's saying for both CPDL and for curriculum development, we should avoid focusing on bodies of knowledge when these are divorced from what using that body of knowledge looks like when it's brought into practical reality in school life. It's no good just sending people off on a improve your mathematical knowledge if you're a primary teacher and maths wasn't your subject, if they're not going to chance to get tests and encounter and work through that in the form in which they're going to encounter it in school life. Here's another test. Is this engagement with CPDL and curriculum development and specialist expertise going to help bring coherence across phases? These systematic reviews always emphasize the role of leaders of CPDL and curriculum development in building cumulative coherence across transitions, particularly across key phases and schools, but also key transitions within schools. And then back to this point, how do we as leaders bring coherence through this business of navigating complexity and speaking to the values and dealing with practical and cognitive and emotional demands? And there's never been a time where those things are more plain and where these things are probably more important. So another point about this is that it's really important to school leaders that the people who we're asking to lead curriculum development have chance to learn about what really good CPDL looks like. And equally that the people who are leading good CPDL know what good curriculum development looks like. Finally, curriculum development depends on great CPDL. Properly structured curriculum development is a great driver of CPDL. Integrating the two means wrapping high impact CPDL protocols like coaching and collaborative inquiry around curriculum development, and remembering not just to do curriculum development but to debrief it, and prompting colleagues to be very explicit about what they've learned and what that means for their professional growth when they're developing the curriculum, so that all the time they're deepening their awareness about the reciprocal benefits between those two things, as well as their contributions to teachers, to pupils' learning. So I was going to finish with a metaphor, and then we could have questions or chat or explore the chat together. But when I was thinking about a metaphor about what we discovered from trying to understand and learn about CPDL alongside curriculum development through this international systematic reviews, I started out with a kind of double helix. I'm not a scientist, so actually I wasn't really sure that my knowledge and understanding of the double helix was good enough to support that. But as an image, it worked really well for me. But in the end, I went to the writing of Ursula Le Guin because I thought this was, there's a double helix. But having said there's a double helix, I don't have the in-depth knowledge to explore that. Someone who's in our session might. So I then went to this one. So Ursula Le Guin says that to light a candle is always to cast a shadow. And I think what this evidence is saying to me is that if we just focus in the very enabling way many schools are on curriculum development, in the way that the changes to the Ofsted model have prompted us to do, without thinking about CPDL, and we have our best colleagues from the start developing absolutely fabulous curricula and tools, and then coming up with that and then saying to our college, now you do this. If we don't thread learning and understanding through CPDL through that process, there will be a shadow lurking at the bottom of the great curriculum design. And equally, if we're planning great CPDL and we're not looking all the time at what our colleagues who are leading curriculum development are creating by way of opportunities to deepen CPDL, then we're creating a shadow at the base of the wonderful CPDL learning work. And that when we get these two things worked on together, that we can reduce that shadow. And of course, one or other has to come into focus at some times, but it feels to me like that metaphor helpfully brings into light that evidence. So, Helene, from my point of view, I've whistled through the presentation. So if we end that sharing now of the slides. Have you ended that? Is that gone?
Nope.
Stop sharing. There we are.
That's it.
So, has any questions come out?
Well, not yet, but I was wondering. So effectively, so you're saying that it's great that that curricular development is happening at the moment, and that there needs to be a kind of professional learning activity around that in order to benefit all from that curriculum development. You seem to suggest that debriefing was one of those strategies. Can you tell us perhaps a little bit more about the ways in which this might be done?
Okay, so well, I mean, it's two things really. So when so I've been interviewing senior CPDL and research leads across all the secondary schools in Blackpool for some ongoing work on literacy we've been doing there in the last fortnight. And one of the things that's really clear is that during lockdown, that quite a lot of the teams were revisiting curriculum development, in particular to look at the literacy demands that the new curricula were making. And early on, that was happening by teams of specialists. And what they were starting to see was that they needed to get middle leaders understanding what that would look like in their subjects, and they needed a chance to be working with their colleagues, giving them feedback on how that might work. And they were looking at things like what different words were used to mean the same concept in different subjects, and different word and vice versa. And so in that exchange, they were thinking not only about how we use technical tier 3 vocabulary, but also teachers were all contributing to that. So everyone felt like they had a stake in a changed approach to the canon, the reading canon, literacy canon, both fiction and non-fiction for next year. But that teachers had had chance to contribute to that, so they felt like they were contributing to curriculum development in their subjects whilst building a more coherent approach to literacy. But what was coming out of the interviews was that they were then going to go back and hold webinars thinking about, well, what's that mean for what we've learned about the curriculum development process, and for ourselves, for our own work on literacy. What does that mean about me as a teacher of reading and writing in science so it was the kind of, first of all, understanding and breaking down the tasks of curriculum development. So they reached right into the lives of classroom teachers, so they had a chance to contribute. And then at the end of the process, going back over that and then thinking, well, what have we learned from doing that?
Okay, so presumably they would have learned a lot. They would have had to deepen their subject knowledge. And then again, I'm thinking even for that stage, you would still need perhaps to provide some support so that people can go and read and deepen their professional knowledge, subject-specific knowledge.
Yes, and the thing was, what they were doing was deepening their knowledge sometimes of other subjects. So a pupil wasn't coming into a kind of history lesson talking about proof, bringing in a definition of proof taken from science or from mathematics, and the history teacher going, but that's not what we mean by proof, this isn't paying attention to the evidence. As I was giving the history teacher a chance to know enough about how the word proof was used in science to build more coherence. So it was about helping teachers understand where the pupils were coming from different subjects. So some of the depth was about understanding the learning of the pupils more deeply, and the community as well.
So the process would then teach those teachers something about the sequencing of the curriculum, but also something about other people's curriculums or other curricular areas.
So instead of telling the students off for using the wrong definition, they were able to go, how interesting, and why is it that you might use proof differently in all these different subjects? And it turns out there are quite a lot of these concepts used like that. And so then the teachers, that was helping the teachers think about their own subject knowledge in a non-defensive way, because they were going, oh, this is really interesting, this is helping me think about my discipline through the eyes of another discipline as well. So that depth became something shared, and so the conversations were really powerful. And what they were able to do then was illustrate that through each of their own approaches to sequencing, and then think about how to make that more coherent from the point of view of the students. And you get the same thing happening in very different ways, of course, in primary, because in primary, it's sometimes more about understanding how a year 6 teacher who just suddenly discovers somebody's not understanding something in history, that becomes a window into something they haven't really understood in maths learning in a much earlier phase, and chance to go and talk to a year 2 teacher about how that particular maths topic happened to unfold. So by identifying these fulcrum areas and fulcrum concepts and giving teachers a chance to understand where they're coming from and going to, and debriefing that was another example of debriefing.
Okay. Your picture is a bit poorer than it was at the beginning. I'm not sure why. Oh, you've come back. I'm glad that you just went to that, because I was wondering about primary, when you have to know about so many different subjects and how much more difficult in a way it might be for particularly smaller teams. That involving a lot of the teachers in the team, in all stages of planning is also surely to be pitted against the time constraints and the fact that there is so much to plan that, you know, in my own department we've had to split some of the planning. And even though, so we would all have kind of the overview and the input at the beginning, you know, that kind of discussion level, you inevitably have to kind of split the tasks, so not everyone has the chance to develop, you know, every part of the curriculum in the same the same depth.
Involving them isn't the same as having them all do all of it, but it's about finding the bit. So lovely examples. We've been training mentors across the whole year in Ipswich Opportunity Area, and many of them have NQTs and RQTs. And they've been learning how to involve, how powerful involving them in a small part of curriculum planning in primary. I mean, we've been doing it primary, secondary, but the primary team in particular, you know, finding the bit where they've got a particular, they're particularly excited and they majored in it in their trainee year or as part of their subject, and helping them to contribute and to plan or to model and watch planning of a particular bit of the curriculum, and then debriefing it so that they knew what the process was that was going on, and they're able to make, having worked, knowing that they're intimately contributing to part of the process, and having a rhythm to that process, and knowing that the process is being set up to manage complexity and take account of practical demands, absolutely means not involving everyone in all of it, but it means having a rhythm and cycle to curriculum development, and making sure curriculum development doesn't happen like this, but happens in public, and that the team that are leading it share, God, we thought we got something fantastic, and then when we started testing it with people, we realized we hadn't thought about this, that, and the other. So it's about everybody knowing that the process is going on, having chance to make a professional contribution at the point at which they can, so that they own it, and so that they can see what their colleagues have been doing.
I think you've just mentioned something quite important, something that I think my head of department did really well, and it's more to do with the kinds of questions. So I suppose it's a tool, a planning tool, but it's also something to make the team think quite hard about, you know, what should be driving the planning of each sequence. So, you know, what kind of questions are we trying to address as we plan or before we even start planning? So I suppose my next question is there out there a kind of a set of tools, curricular tools that we can use? You know, it might be a set of questions or different steps to take or anything like that, or kind of tensions to be aware of. I'm just wondering how we might find access to different tools to help us think about the curriculum.
The one that springs first to mind is buried in an appendix of Vivian Robinson's leadership analysis. And I will dig it out, because it is, you know, right in the basement behind a door in a cubicle. I'll try and dig it out and put it in the version of the PowerPoint on the Cure website later today. I mean, she takes and critiques and analyzes what she thinks is a curriculum development tool that she thinks attends to some of these principles, the ones that are in her review. There are new principles that are coming from other reviews that have been done since then, but that's the one that I think is most practical. So I'll try and dig that out and add it to the slides a bit later.
Yeah, you're right, actually. You've just reminded me of that. Yeah. And but even having a set of questions such as, you know, even around the big themes around, you know, the big knowledge, the core knowledge, the how to shape things, the being aware of the assessment, the links between assessment and curriculum, and that kind of thing is also a really good starting point when you're starting to talk to colleagues about planning.
We did a quick review for OECD earlier this year, late last year, on what's known about links between pedagogy, assessment and content in curriculum design, and that's not great either. I mean, you know, these things are so complex that the research world on the whole can't hold all that complexity together and pay attention to pupil impacts. So all of this research, so much of it, stops short of whether it makes any difference to pupils or not, and all the evidence tends to be just about whether it, you know, how it appeared in school policies or how it appeared in practice at best, and very often not even that. It's a very complex thing that teachers do. It's an incredibly complex thing that teachers do. And the research world and the policy world can only really engage with a little bit or a lens of it. And, you know, I kind of sometimes think of this as like this, I don't want this to sound disrespectful. It's a bit like, you know, a really beautiful cartoon that's made up, you know, policymakers and researchers try and make this cartoon film as lots of individual, you know, images that they can flip through quickly, you know, so that they can make it simple. But teachers can't do that. Teachers have to live in the middle of the film, and so they simplify it so they can deal with a little bit of it. And on the whole, people have tried to simplify the curriculum design bit by dealing with it separately, or the assessment bit by dealing with it separately, or the CPDL bit by dealing with it separately. And what this map is showing, and what I'm trying to communicate, is that if you separate those things, you weaken both of them, and that by pulling them together, you make both stronger.
Which could be quite easily overwhelming for a new colleague, you know, because you would have to know quite a lot about assessment, about effective formative assessment, and how to kind of weave that through a scheme of work or a unit of work.
But so there's I'll put this in the slides too, though it's not very relevant to this. David Hargreaves, many decades ago, wrote what was called what he called a practical common sense model of teacher development, in which he was pointing out that very early on, new teachers, first of all, you know, can I manage the class? Can I manage behaviour? And then, can I teach the stuff I'm supposed to teach? A wider circle. Then another wider circle still. Can I pay attention to who the learners are and how they're learning? And then can I pay attention to who the learners are in this school, you know, what it was like in a previous year in a primary school, what it's going to be like in year 6 or year 5 or whatever the next year is, or in a secondary school, what are they like in other subjects? And that only over time do teachers have chance to widen their sphere of attention. And he also talks about there being 2 planes. So there's the teaching, learning, pedagogy, assessment plane, and there's the performance plane. You know, can I meet the QTS standards? Can I get through the performance review hoops? How will CPDL help me with that? But different teachers with different skills and, you know, different specialisms that they bring into their teacher identity, you know, are able to find the bits that they can contribute from very early on. And we see those mentors finding the professional learners they're mentoring making huge progress when they get to see their colleagues synthesizing all this complex knowledge and being really clear they can make a contribution to a bit of it, and then listening to their colleagues debriefing it. So having chance to be part of that, but not trying to do all of it, I think is really important. And I think it's a big challenge in terms of the early careers framework, because the early careers framework is just so big, and it's trying to get all of pedagogy into sort of injected into people's professional lives in 2 years. And I worry about that, because it's not rich enough on curriculum content in my mind. And, you know, the risk is that will happen divorced from, you know, it will further divorce CPDL from curriculum content. So I'm trying to say, you know, when we're doing important work around the early careers framework, it's really important to bring that to life in the curriculum design and development process. But for me, I think that will be a richer experience for everyone. I think, you know, don't do ECF coverage at the cost of quality and depth in terms of the curriculum, I suppose, is what that's saying.
I don't know. I think I quite like the document, because obviously there's a lot to cover, and in my mind it might put you in a better place to actually be able to engage in those curricular discussions a bit further down the line. But that doesn't mean that you can't involve younger colleagues into the discussion. Someone was asking, can you share more about the role of experts in developing curriculum and supporting CPDL? I suppose that's what we've been doing. I think perhaps in terms of the experts, this might be related to a question I also had, because you said that the leaders of CPDL need to know a lot about good curricular development, but how do you ensure that happens?
Well, they need to know enough about curriculum development to know how to tap into it. To have how to design CPDL so that it enriches and is kind of a spiral wrapped around. So CPDL is wrapped as a spiral around curriculum development, and I'm saying, and leaders of CPDL need to, it's vice versa. So leaders of curriculum design need to know enough about CPDL to know how to, for example, design coaching or collaborative inquiry around the design and development process, and vice versa, that leaders of CPDL need to know that curriculum development offers a great opportunity for, say, an early careers teacher to be thinking about something that's in the early careers framework, but in terms of why that matters in the curriculum at this point in time. So they each know enough about the other world to not take over, not be experts in it, but to know what kind of expertise the other one's going to bring to it, and to bring those two things together.
And I suppose as a leader of CPDL, you could also remind the teams that, you should be doing this kind of process. And I think we've been talking about curriculum development, but it's also, I'm sure that we're including in that term curriculum reviews and evaluation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not mean writing it from scratch. I mean ongoing, taking responsibility for seeing the curriculum realization is the best it can be, and really is, meeting the needs of the local communities as well as the national curriculum, and being coherent across all the important transitions in all of its different guises and at all its different stages.
So if someone is quite new to the role of leader of CPDL, for example, it could be quite useful for them to also have access to a range of other activities that have been encouraged in other schools. And I'm just thinking about not just encouraging discussions at the point of planning and perhaps suggesting ways in which the curriculum can be constantly reviewed and evaluated, but also designing specific tasks. For example, looking at pupils' work and reflecting upon whether or not we feel that what's there reflects the input that we had planned, and ways in which we could perhaps review the inputs.
Well, I agree with both of those. I mean, it seems to me that if I was I was putting together a program for new CPDL leaders, part of their modeling their own professional learning would be this process of going, all right, what role has deep specialist expertise played in your professional formation so far? You've become a CPDL leader, but perhaps you were, a specialist in early years, or perhaps you were a history specialist or a modern foreign language specialist. What did your specialism enable you to do that helped you become a leader? What does that look like in other phases, other contexts, other subjects? What does that mean for what you're looking like? So part of your induction into the new role is having chance to see how deep specialist knowledge about curriculum development works in other contexts or settings, in order that you can develop metacognitive control over your specialist knowledge, so that you can see it and recognize it in others, and remember to go look for it and not feel you've got to do it all yourself. Yeah,
that's interesting, because the elephant in the room is, you become leader of CPDL and actually there is no curriculum for that, and in fact for most leadership roles, but so much of the process of becoming a leader is perhaps because of something else that you've achieved, or something that you've achieved in a very specific area. So it's always a bit tricky, isn't it? You can't suddenly become expert at something.
Miss that, you froze.
Sorry, we've just lost the sound on you now. Can you say again?
And you froze, sorry. So just do the question again.
My question probably is around a program of development, or some kind of a curriculum that leaders of CPDL can access when they are first appointed, I suppose.
Well, I mean, there's going to be an MPQ for leaders of teacher education, or I don't know what the latest name for it is, but I've got a meeting with DFE this week, so no doubt I'll find out. But so that may help with that. But for me, the $64,000 question is, can we help people develop metacognitive control over their implicit knowledge that's helped to get them here, such that they can see and help unlock that in their colleagues, and such that they they don't feel that in becoming a CPDL leader, they have to lead all CPDL. You know, what they have to become is an incredibly good spotter of magical CPDL opportunities and way of making that coherent and systematic in the day-to-day life of the school. And they have to become, you know, that what they need to think about is what are the systems in the school and the day-to-day ongoing activities that mean you can make this part of the school as a professional learning environment. You know, for me, debriefing, you know, there's just too little of that. We have teams working collaboratively and they might evaluate how well that scheme of learning works, but never take the time to go, and how did that change our professional understanding? How does that change our sense of what our career pathway might be? How does that change our approach to leadership? So it's that debriefing. So the more you go into leadership, the more you need to have metacognitive control, and the more you need to understand the role that specialist in-depth knowledge and contribution and tools plays, and be able, you know, and then, you know, just this business, am I thinking hard enough about the practical, the cognitive, the emotional demands, whatever beautiful thing I'm planning is making on my colleagues? Have I attended to making that, I'd have said, above everything else, over a strong enough length of time, a long enough length of time, with electricity pylons keeping the power moving over time? You know, that's probably more important than how much of a, you know, can I make 2 whole days available for it? Probably much less important than can I keep this going for an hour a week, every week for 2 terms. You know, a half day, you know, hard to plan, hard to keep differentiation going over a half day, but things that you can do little and often mean that you can fine tune differentiation for your colleagues' support. You know, you can listen out for what's the other new priority in a school or a department or phase that this part of the CPDL process can live in and be tested in, and you can do a bit of iterative micro inquiry. And so I think the job of the CPDL leader is to develop their own metacognitive control of understanding how to help the school become a strong professional learning environment, really focus on helping everyone work more deeply and understand why they're doing the things they're doing, and modeling their ignorance about that. There's a wonderful man called Reg Revens who developed things called action learning sets. Many people here will know about action. So his father was the engineer who debriefed all the crew members on the Titanic who survived, and to find out what had gone wrong. And he asked his father, what did you learn? And he said, to learn the difference between wisdom and intelligence. And he said, what was the most important question you ever asked? He said, what does my ignorance look like? And you know, so I think that being a CPD lead, you know, you're in this magical place because your ignorance is you know, a learning opportunity for someone else, and showing that you are learning and that you don't know everything, showing your workings as you go is magical, because we're much more infectious, like laughter rather than like COVID. It will travel, and so that's a great, you know, learning in public about depth and being passionate about depth and being passionate about how we can systematize the school. I mean, I just think these people's role is about the L in continuing professional development and learning, not actually the CPD. And you know, I'm not a big fan of regulating CPD, because I think we'll regulate the stuff done to teachers, whereas actually what matters is what the leaders in schools do to make the L strong and part of teachers' everyday lives and pupils' hinterland lives as well, therefore.
I think that's definitely something you drilled into me over the years. For me, it's no longer CPD, it's either professional learning or CPDL. It's the L that matters. I think it's a perfect point to end today's session, and it's been a pleasure, an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Philippa. So enjoy the rest of your day.
Oh, and I will add those slides, including the David Hargreaves ever-widening attention circles. And
so that will be on the Cure website, and yeah, so we'll share the link to that too, and I'll put the link to I'll add it to the blurb on the YouTube video as well, if you don't mind.
It'd be fun if people added to the survey afterwards.
Yeah.
So,
okay, we'll put the link up then on the feed.
Yeah, and so then we can all have a look then at how that picture evolves as more people do it. Okay, thanks
Contribute.
ever so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Philippa. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Right, bye everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow. Claire Stoneman will be talking to us, so be sure to tune in. Thank you. Bye-bye.